Isaiah chapter 7. We looked rather extensively at this, the virgin promise, or the prophecy of the virgin birth, where a virgin would conceive and bear a son, his name being Emmanuel. And this is upon the basis of the Syro-Ephraimitic War. Syria and its king, Rezin, had made an alliance with Ephraim, the northern kingdom of Israel, and its king Pekah. And they were trying to get Ahaz to join with them in their allegiance to try to rebel against Assyria. And God is telling Ahaz, don't worry about these two nations, because he had refused, and they were going to try and overthrow Ahaz and put a vassal king in his place who would do their bidding. And God is telling Ahaz, don't worry about them. And in verses 15 and 16, he sets forth a time frame in which those nations would be destroyed. Before the child knows to refuse the evil and choose the good. The land that thou abhorrest, that would be these two nations who had joined together, will be forsaken of both her kings. So that's the background of chapter 7. We come down now to verses 17 through verse 25, and we have a punishment for an Assyrian alliance. Let's read this, and then we'll come back and discuss it. But the Lord shall bring upon thee, and upon thy people, and upon thy father's house, days that have not come from the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. And they shall come and shall rest all of them in the desolate valleys, and in the holes of the rocks, and upon all thorns, and upon all bushes. In the same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired, namely by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet, and it shall also consume the beard. And it shall come to pass in that day that a man shall nourish a young cow and 2 sheep. And it shall come to pass for the abundance of milk that they shall give, he shall eat butter. For butter and honey shall every one eat that is left in the land. And it shall come to pass in that day that every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines and 1,000 silverlings. It shall even be for briars and thorns. With arrows and with bows shall men come thither, because all the land shall become briars and thorns. And on all hills there that shall be digged with the mattock, there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorns. But it shall be for the sending forth of oxen, and for the treading of lesser cattle. This is now understanding Ahaz and the situation, these two nations coming upon him. He's fearful of them. God is saying, you don't need to worry about them. They're going to be destroyed. But Ahaz has other plans. You remember God said, ask for a miracle, any miracle, whatever it might be, and I'll perform it to give you assurance that you don't have to worry about these two nations. And what was his response? He would not ask for it. I won't tempt God in that way. Well, wouldn't have been tempting God because God said to do it. But he refused. Now, why did he refuse? Because what?
Because I think he'd already thought that he had already talked to the other kings. They already had a plan in place.
Okay, he already had a plan in place. That's really it. The plan was to call upon Assyria. Now, Rezin and Pekah, they were trying to get Ahaz to join with them in rebelling against Assyria. He's going to call upon Assyria. That serves as the background of these verses that we just read. You're going to be punished if you try to join with Assyria or call upon Assyria in regards to these nations. So in verse 17, the Lord shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy father's house days that have not come from the day of that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria. So basically, God is telling him there's a time coming that's going to be far worse than any Syrian and Ephraim alliance. Here's these two nations that are they're going to come upon. This will be far worse. And he likens it, saying that it's going to be far worse than anything since the division of the kingdom. That's the day that Ephraim departed from Judah. Ephraim the northern kingdom, Judah the southern kingdom. So at that division that took place after Solomon's reign, and the people tried to get Rehoboam to lower the tax burden upon them, and Rehoboam first goes to the older wise men, and they told him, "We'll do what the people say and they'll be faithful to you." He didn't like that, so he goes to the young people that he grew up with, and they told him, "Tell the people the tax burden's going to be a whole lot greater, and if you think you were punished by my father, it's not going to be anything in comparison to the way that I'm going to punish them." That led to the rebellion against Rehoboam, led by Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. And his epitaph throughout history now is, "Who made Israel to sin." Well, since that day in which that division took place, the divided kingdom, there's nothing been worse than this. This calamity that God is describing here is going to be brought by God himself. Notice the first part, "The Lord shall bring upon thee." So this is a punishment by God upon the people. Now then, how is God going to do it? By the Assyrians. God is going to use this evil nation of Assyria to bring about a punishment upon his people, the southern kingdom. Now, Ahaz, as I said, was wanting shelter from Syria and Ephraim by appealing to them, but God is going to give Assyria to him. That's what he's saying. You're wanting Assyria to help you in sheltering you from these two nations. I'm going to give Assyria to you, but it's not going to be in the way that you want it. It's going to be a great calamity. In their commentary, Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown writes, "After subduing Syria and Israel, the Assyrians shall encounter Egypt," 2 Kings 23:29. "And Judah shall be the battlefield of both," Isaiah 7:18. "And be made tributary to that very Assyria, 2 Chronicles 28:20 and 2 Kings 16:7 and 8, now about to be called as an ally, Isaiah 39 verses 1 through 6. Egypt, too, shall prove a fatal ally, Isaiah 36:6, 31:11, etc. End quote. So basically, here's Assyria. They're going to come. They're going to destroy first Syria, then Ephraim. Egypt comes up to battle them. Where? Right over Judah, the southern kingdom. Southern kingdom becomes the battlefield between these two great nations. And as a result, it's destroyed. But he also makes the point, Judah becomes tributary then to Assyria. Wayne Jackson wrote concerning this, quote, both the Egyptians and Assyrians played a role in the downfall of the nation. Compare 2 Kings 23, 33, 34, 2 Chronicles chapter 35, 20 and 24, and then chapter 36, 1 and 2. Isaiah chapter 36, 37. That's chapters 36 and 37. And then 2 Chronicles 36, 7 through 21, end quote. So both nations, Assyria, Egypt, played the role in the downfall of Judah, the southern kingdom. Why? Because Ahaz was too prideful to call upon God and to submit himself to God. Dale?
36 and 37 is when Rabshakeh is ridiculing and running his mouth and saying what they're going to do on the wall, and then the Lord causes Isaiah to calm Hezekiah down and calm everybody else down that is having anxiety, saying he ain't going to pitch himself forward here, and then his son's killing man, drowning like in a Sharizer later in the chapter 37.
It is the time in which Rabshakeh, it is the time in which Rabshakeh makes the claim you need to submit to Assyria, and that is also when God kills the 185,000 Assyrians, causing Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, to return home, where he then was killed by his sons while he was worshiping in their temple. I believe it was the temple Nishrosh. So that is Isaiah chapter 36 and 37. But at that time, with Rabshakeh and the events of that, they had destroyed all of the surrounding area. They were now surrounding Jerusalem. Jerusalem was all basically the only thing that was left of Judah at the time. So
what you're saying is, you're saying that they're fighting this war between Egypt and Syria, but in the meantime, as a side factor, they're destroying all these cities while they're doing it?
well, certainly.
Wow.
The Allied nations fought against Germany. What happened to France?
Bombed it into oblivion.
Oh, they did, but wait a minute. We weren't fighting against France.
Right.
France was destroyed because that's where the battle took place to a great extent. The battle was taking place over Judah, or at Judah, in that southern kingdom, but the battle was between two other nations. But they destroyed Judah in the midst of it.
You wouldn't have to make a decision which way you was going to go. Went back or went the other way, you was going
Well, they're going to be destroyed no matter what. Judah is, because that's where the battlefield was taking place, or the battle was taking place. Judah was the battlefield. Verse 18 then, it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost part of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. So, just as kind of an aside, that phrase, in that day, when you see that, you always have to consider the what? Context. Because a lot of times that becomes a key phrase as to a messianic prophecy and what's going to take place during the church or the Messiah and his time. But that's not always the case. That certainly is not the case here, is it? In that day is referring to that time in which these two nations of Assyria and Egypt are fighting. In that day. And it says the Lord is going to hiss in relationship. The Lord's going to bring this upon Jerusalem as a punishment for Ahaz's rejection of God to the acceptance of Assyria. Their salvation would have been in God if they had humbled themselves under God. Ahaz was refusing that. That was the refusal of God's offer. Ask for a miracle? No, I'm not going to. Why? Because I'm not going to do what God says. I've got my own plans. Now, it's pictured as a plague of flies from Egypt and an attack of bees from Assyria. So that's how it is pictured, as to here's both of these coming upon Jerusalem, or the southern kingdom, and thus the devastation or the punishment that God is bringing upon the southern kingdom. Dale?
Is that like a little bit of sarcasm? That using the phrase flies and bees?
I don't think that would be sarcasm, no.
Like he's showing what the judgment's going to be like? It's going to be intense? Is that what he's saying?
He's just saying that God's going to punish the southern kingdom.
Where's he going to get all that honey?
Well, I use the word verb hiss, though. What's the point? He's going to like...
Have you ever seen, for example, a snake?
Yeah.
And watch it hiss at something that it perceives as a danger before it strikes out? God's going to hiss against Jerusalem or against the southern kingdom. He's going to strike out using these two nations.
Can I ask a question? Remember it says in Psalms 2:1-4, he's going to laugh, and he ties it into Acts 4. Is that kind of the same idea?
No.
The Lord's going to laugh or hiss?
No, it's not the same. It's not the same, no.
Okay.
This is the aspect of he is bringing a punishment upon the land.
But when he talks about the flies and the bees, it's going to be like troublesome, just like they are to people. Like
It's
the animals can come in, all those flies, all those bees, and all these armies are going to come in there just like that.
It's something that he can't stand. That's a good way to put it, yes.
Comparable, in other words, sort of, in a roundabout way.
He's using it as an illustration, Dale,
Okay.
that here's something that is intolerable How many people do you know want to get into an area or where they're going to be covered with flies and bees? You don't think that would be comfortable? Surely everybody wants to enjoy that type of a feeling. That's what he's saying. It's going to be an intolerable type of situation. Because God is bringing these two nations upon you and he's going to destroy you.
So is you carrying flies and bees to those nations going around?
Those are the nations that are coming upon them, and yes, the fly and the bee, the fly that's in Egypt, the bee that's in Assyria, and here they are coming upon the southern kingdom. So, yes.
Do you think maybe it might be indicating the strength of the nation? The fly, maybe it'd be a little stronger, but flies is aggravating.
Yeah, we'd rather have flies than bees, wouldn't we? So, I don't know if there's that aspect that the greater of the two is Assyria. That was the situation, though. Assyria was the greater of the two nations, or more powerful of the two. So whether the use of bee and fly is trying to indicate that, I don't know. I'm not sure I would say I'd go that far. It's a possibility.
If you think back during the plagues of Egypt, all of those things, that's what they were for. They used literal flies and literal things. These were going to be
The armies. Yeah.
and cause the same problem.
It's causing the same type of trouble. Verse 19 then. And they shall come, and shall rest all of them in the desolate valleys, and in the holes of the rocks, and upon all thorns, and upon all bushes. So basically, this is saying that these two nations are going to come over the land to such an extent that they're going to fill every nook and cranny, using our terminology today that we would use. Every nook and cranny of the land, they're going to fill it. Maybe that also shows the vastness of their armies. Remember, God in one night killed 185,000 Assyrians. What's the population, I think, of Escambia County? The last time I looked was around 330,000. Isn't that about right? Anybody know? So over half of the size of Escambia County, that number of people.
Well, you'd have to count the battle, divide them by 2.
Now, Ray, we're not going to get into the dead people voting and all of that. We know that takes place, but basically I'm trying to just describe this is one army, and that's not all of the army that's there. Pekah coming in and killing 120,000. It seems like there was a battle and that many were killed, but I don't remember the figures. But I'm just trying to express, because the 185,000 was not the entirety of the Assyrian army. It was, I don't even know if it was the majority of their army. We know it was a great number, though, don't we? Because some of them did wake up and they left.
That was in 2 Chronicles 28.
2 Chronicles 28.
He killed 120,000 people.
That Pekah killed 120,000 of Judah. Okay.
Part of this.
Yeah.
After all of it, after he got past the signs and all of that 1 year while he was spared, but the next year, I think after that, that's when they came in.
And they had the battle then. And a number of people probably on both sides killed. But here you have Egypt and Assyria. Basically, the numbers of those armies, no telling how big they were. And God is expressing the size of those armies by using these type, that, you know, the desolate valleys, the holes of the rocks, all of the thorns, all of the bushes, they're going to be covered with people, the armies. Dale?
Based on, like Springboard and all his comment, Pekah killing and leading his army to kill 120,000. How long after the 120,000 were dead, month-wise or year-wise, was it that the Egyptians and Syrians did their deal? Was that like a couple of years later, or 10 years later? Or
After
the 120,000 by Pekah, his army.
that would have happened after the Assyrian.
Oh, that was after the Assyrians. And Egyptians battled.
Probably the next year, and Pekah would have been dead within 3 years of this prophecy here. So
within 3 years it would have happened.
yes,
So the whole thing was moved, all of it.
you're talking about a short period of time. Yes.
That sounds like it.
But basically, he's saying these armies are going to be so large that everything's going to be covered with army. There's not going to be any place to go and hide, basically. And that also kind of gives you a sense then of the destruction that's going to be taking place over the land. This was just in Judah that this is taking place as far as the battle between Egypt and Assyria. And I don't have the maps pulled up, but if you think of that area, just as here I'll draw it on the map, on the blackboard here. You have over here, this area is the Mediterranean Sea. You have Sea of Galilee with Jordan River coming down to the Dead Sea. Here's the land of Palestine. You have the northern kingdom. Then you have Syria and Assyria and Babylon over. On the other side of the Jordan, you have a huge desert. People did not cross the desert, basically. What they did is they would go around and then come down. So you have Egypt down here, and what you have then is Assyria way up here has come over. They've destroyed Syria. They're coming down while Egypt is coming up. They meet in the southern kingdom of Judah. So that's basically what you have. Probably should have told Andrew to bring up those maps, but a little bit late now because my drawing on that blackboard was so good. I mean, those maps that, we see, we've seen the other weeks, don't even compare to that, the greatness of that one. But that's basically the way in which you have. A lot of times in the prophets, they're talking about a nation from the north coming down. They're coming south. That's because even though they might be to the east, basically, of the land of Canaan, they have to go miss the desert, and so they come over, across, and then come down. And so they're coming from the north, even though they might be basically to the east. So understand that when in reading the prophets, if you read something in regards to a nation coming down or coming south, that's what you're dealing with a lot of times. It's not simply that they are from the north. They come from the east and then coming down. Verse 20. In the same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired, namely, by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the feet, and it shall also consume the beard. So now then, in this verse, Isaiah uses the figure of shaving. Now, some people basically don't have to shave, but some do. And some people, it seems like they can go a couple of weeks without ever shaving. But he's using the figure here that it's as if God is going to shave Israel of all of its hair. Kind of like a barber with a razor, shaving all the hair off. Have you ever had surgery? And maybe some of you have once or twice. They have to shave the hair off of that area. Well, here you're shaving all of the hair off. Now then, the barber in this case, or the illustration I was using of in surgery, it would be the nurse generally. Here, though, the barber that God is using is the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria is, he's saying, going to strip Judah clean of all of its hair. Now then, why would he use such a figure as this? I mean, to us, that seems kind of, why in the world? A custom of sort of shows who you are, Dale.
I got an idea. You know, the review or the warning that it amounts to, it would cause the remnant that are mentioned all through the Isaiah to take it more seriously, and maybe they could influence some others to wake up and say, wow, I better repent. Maybe that would be the effect of it. It would scare
Pam? Yes, that's it. It has a connotation of shame or a humiliating experience. Let's look at a few verses. Isaiah 15 and verse 2. He has gone up to Bajeth and to Dibon, the high places, to weep. Moab shall howl over Nebo and over Medeba. All of their heads shall be baldness and every beard cut off. Now what's it associated with? He's gone to the high places to weep, to mourn, the howling over this situation. What? It's as if their head's been shaved, their beards cut off. Jeremiah 47 and verse 5. Baldness is come upon Gaza. Ashkelon is cut off with the remaining remnant of their valley. How long wilt thou cut thyself? Well, here, baldness. Well, Gaza and Ashkelon are two of the capital cities of the Philistines. And so he's saying in this that both of these capital cities are going to be destroyed. But he uses that idea there of baldness. Ezekiel 7 and verse 18. They shall also grind themselves with sackcloth, and horror shall cover them, and shame shall be upon all the faces, and baldness upon all their heads. So here's girding themselves with sackcloth, covering themselves because of horror, shame. And what does he associate with? Baldness. And then Amos 8 and verse 11. I will turn your feast into mourning, and all your songs into lamentations, and I will bring up sackcloth upon all loins, and baldness upon every head. And I will make it as a mourning of an only son, and the end thereof as a bitter day. So here you have bitterness, lamentations, mournings, and what? Baldness of the head. I've heard some people, talk about, these or joke about, because it must be a joke, that God saw some beautiful heads and he covered the rest. In other words, baldness is beautiful, and God covered or gave hair to everyone else. Obviously, that is just a vicious joke. And the ones who said it didn't know what they were talking about. But obviously, they were bald who said it. But baldness was associated all the time with shame, with sorrow, with mourning, lamentation. And so here you have the shaving of the head all the way down to the feet, even consuming the beard. So the whole picture is shame and reproach that's going to come upon the southern kingdom. God shaving them to that extent, to bring shame and reproach upon them. Bill?
Wasn't there a case, I believe it was King David sent some emissaries to Tyre or Lebanon?
I believe it was Tyre.
And
Yeah.
the guy shaved their beards and cut their and then they went to a certain place until it
Could grow back.
and
Right. David had sent, the king had died. The son had taken over the kingship, and David sent men to console him in the passing of his father. And they took them as spies, and so they cut off half of their, or shave their head, or cut their beards, cut their clothing off.
Cut half of it off. To humiliate him.
It was an attempt to humiliate them, and yes, they had to, David told them, you wait in that city until your beards grow back and all of that. Now then, why did he do that? Because it was shame. He was sending them away in disgrace, because that's the way they viewed those things. The hair, the beard, and that's why also consuming the beard here. God's going to bring upon the southern kingdom of Judah shame and disgrace. Verse 21, it shall come to pass in that day that a man shall nourish a young cow and 2 sheep. He's stating here that there's going to be a scarcity of items. Instead of a flourishing herd of cattle, an individual would be, or a man would be fortunate to own 1 young cow, a heifer giving milk, and 2 sheep. So you'll be lucky if you have 1 young cow and 2 sheep instead of a flourishing flock, because they're just not, they don't exist anymore because they've been destroyed. It's interesting that Tiglath-Pileser, who is the king of Assyria, in his inscription mentions his carrying off of horned cattle and sheep to the amount of many thousands from the countries that he conquered. So when he goes in and conquers a land, he brings back all of these cattle, all of the sheep, so he leaves the land basically empty. That's what's being described here. That they just don't exist anymore. Right? To the victor goes the spoils. That's it. And he was the victor, and so he took the spoils. And with Tiglath-Pileser in particular, it mentions the spoils that he took was their cattle. So that's why God here in verse 21 here mentions these things specifically.
On all bases, one of the practices of intimidation that the Syrians used is they would use object lessons and examples to cause fear in the population surrounding. They stack heads up in front of the city wall, city entryway, and then the grapevine talk would get around, people be scared to death and hearing about it. That's the way they operate.
We live in a society that is very tame. I can't think of a sanitized society. That's the word that I was wanting to use. The horrors of that day people would be going to the Geneva Convention and saying that it is the war crimes today, because they were far worse than anything that we've known in our society. Some of and just trying to express, men were literally carried away with fish hooks through their mouth and nose, and basically being drug away in captivity. Respect of life just did not exist in these type of situations. They were the enemy. You destroy them. You do anything to them that you want to do. It doesn't matter. And there was no compassion that would be shown to an enemy. That's why putting skulls of people, well, who cares? That's the way in which they worked. Well, we'll stop there and start, Lord willing, next week with verse 22.